Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 2, bottom of page 1183, Aleph Kuf Pei Hey. Okay. So we've reached to the point, closer to the bottom of the page, in explaining what...
Page 1185.
I said that. Aleph Kuf Pei Hey, 1185? What did I say? The bottom of 1185. Yeah. So we've been explaining the concept of Adam, the word Adam, which of course comes from Torah. The God called the human being Adam, but Adam refers to the structure of all Seder Shtalshlus. And every level there's Adam. And we discussed Adam being the Pnimius, Shema, Milagav, from within, and now added also the term Hiskalulus and Bittel. So it's due to the Bittel that the Adam expresses, because the human being encompasses everything, like he said, Al Yenim and Tachtenim, everything is encompassed in the Adam. And therefore, and that is a result of the Pnimius of the Ma, the Bittel, that sees the Hiskalus. When you look at something on an external level, you see the distinctions, the separation, as he said. Then when you look at Chitzenius, the words are, when you look at the Chitzenius, things are separate, things are different and separate from one another. And everything has its own function. But their connection comes beside the Pnimius. And that is due to the Bittel of Shema, the Bittel of Adam, Gematria Ma. Like he says, the Bittel is, he says these words, I'm just using. There's the Shema b'chinas ha-Bittel b'chinas ha-nochas hatzmusei, putting yourself aside, putting the identity, essential identity aside, u'bitlu keli ligili erein sof. And Bittel, this suspension of self, this selflessness, is the container for Gili Erein Sof. Okay. So therefore, Al Kain b'chinas Shema mekasher u'mechaber u'mamshir Gili Erein Sof b'hem gam b'biyah. I was thinking about the Behem. Sometimes he uses the word, if you remember, Behem v'al Yodam. So maybe he went to say Behem v'al Yodam. I don't know if he wanted to also say V'al Yodam, but Behem means in them and through them. The question I had was, what's Behem? Shema is not a Behem, it should be Ba. It's a singular. But regardless, what it does is it Mekasher, it binds, Mechaber, and connects, Umamshich, and draws the Gili of the infinite divine light also into Biyah. So that's the role of Adam. Okay. I mean, there's some more details we learned about. I just want to mention one, where he speaks about the different Shema, Shema HaKloli, Shema Da'aba, Shema Da'ak, Ma HaChodosh, that the Shema exists on different levels. But I wanted to mention, going back, I posted it on the group, that the Giddim, we spoke about the Giddim back earlier up on the earlier part of the page when he was speaking about from the Biyure Hazeir, Maimer Hazeir, he says that Meichin is a parts of Gomer B'fnei Atzmei, and from there draws down into the 248 limbs of the body through the Gidi HaMoyach. So the word Gid means literally a channel. And you look at the translations of it, it can mean anything. It can mean, we have even Gid HaNosha, the sciatic nerve. So Gid means many things. So I pointed out that the Maimorim Chassidus brought from Eitz Chaim, Shar Chitzenis, Primis Chitzenis, Shar Mem, Shar Mem, Chelik Yud Beis, Shar Mem, what is it? Onof Yud Beis. He says there are three types of Gidim. There are three types of channels, we'll call it. Gidi Hadam, those are the arteries and the nerves that carry blood in the body. There's Gidi Haruach, those that carry breath, air, things like the lungs, the oxygen. And the third, he says, is Gidi Hargosha. And the Maimer, but Biuri Hazer, Pashto, he actually uses in Yiddish the word nerves. He says nerven, nerves. And it connects it, here he doesn't say this, but in the Maimorim it speaks about that they come from Chochma, Bina, Das. Bina is the blood. The blood Gidim come from Bina, the mind. They all come from the mind. Chochma is the Ruach, and Das is the Hargosha. But here he only speaks about Moichin in general. And when he says that from the Moichin goes into the Evarim, as I said, most likely he's talking here, he could be talking about all three, to be honest, because all three are necessary for the limbs to function. They need blood, they need oxygen, and they need nerves, they need feeling. But when you look closer, he speaks about the Atzomis. That's what he mentions afterwards, right? First he says that there's the three, Adam Pnimi, Adam Chetzeni, Adam, and Adam Emtsoi. He says these are the Moichin, the Gidim, and the Evarim. So technically you could say he's talking about all Gidim, basically all links. But then he says it's also Basar Gidim Vatzomas, the flesh or the flesh, or what I used, the other word I used, and the Gidim and the Atzom is the bones. So I looked it up in Zohar, but the Zohar says there that the Grama B'nuyin Amaya, Ze'abchinas Amechin, that yes, that the bones are directly linked, because the Gemara in Nida says that in the three partners that create a human being, the Eibishter provides the soul, the father, from him come the bones, all the white elements that come from the seed of the father. So Chassidus explains, because it comes from Moyach Ha'av, like the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Beis in Tanya. So the Moyach Ha'av, that creates the bones. From the mother come everything that is red and blood oriented, like blood and the other things that are the colors. So he says that the Atzomis, in the Maimorim, it says that Atzomis have in them the marrow, Moyach. Moyach ha'etzem is called the bone marrow. It's also called Moyach, because it comes from the mind. And he says he connects that to the nerves. I'm just telling you what it says in the Maimorim. But regardless, the content is clear that there are three levels. And the three levels is that the Gidim are the Mamutza, the Adam Emtsoi, in between, that connect the mind to the rest of the body. That's one thing I wanted to share.
So that's very interesting. Gidim is a general name for everything which is expressed in a different way. Channels to bring down different things.
It says clearly, Shloisha mine Gidim heim. That's the Lashon. There are three types of Gidim: Dam, Ruach, and Hargosha. You can look it up. In the Zohar he quotes, Biri Azer, Al-Maimon Azer, Rish Parsha tells us, he says it explicitly. Okay. The second thing I wanted to tell you, remember earlier he had said that B'moke Machar, on the fifth line of this page, he says, B'moke Machar Mavur, the Gamad Tzaneris Protim, Hem Sheres Ha'eris Ha'mislapshim B'kelim. So I went to look for it. And interestingly, that Moke Machar could be referring to the Tzemach Tzedek, but I think it's referring, the Rebbe Rashab is referring to his own Ayin Beis. If you go back to chapter Reish Lamed, chapter Reish Chavtes, 229, in volume 1, page 464, 465, he quotes it Tzemach Tzedek there, but there he discusses at length different ways of understanding what the tzeneris are. That sinner, that artery, and how it mistaifim imenu, how it branches off into smaller branches. So there he speaks about different ways to understand it. So based on my research so far, it looks to me the Mokem Acher is this Hemshech Ayin Beis, chapter 229, especially on page 465. And what's interesting when you look there, it actually helps us understand this page very well. There he talks at length, much more at length, about Shema, about Odom and Iskalalus. And that's the beginning, if those of you remember when we learned it probably 5 years ago at least, maybe even more. We learned it was the beginning of the concept of, after he spoke about Aleph Pella, he started the whole discussion, I mentioned it the other day, about Shema of Tikkun and Tohu, that Ma creates Bittul. And that's the critical component in the developing the interface of the higher and the lower levels. Like what he called there, Kasisa Pella, from the Posik in Yeshaya, that not Aramimcha Elekai HaMelech, the other Aramimcha, Elekai Havaya, Elekai Ata Aramimcha, Oida Shimcha, Kiasisa Pella, Eitzes Merachik Amuna Uman. So he says Kiasisa Pella is Pella and Aleph. So Chochmah, as it faces Keser, is in a state of Bittul. And there's two interpretations in the Zohar there. What's the Aleph, he says? The Mili Alphan of Shema. So I'd strongly advise, if you really want to understand better what we learned here, look in chapter 229, again, pages 464, 465, 466, that chapter, and you'll understand a lot better what we're learning here. Now, why the Rebbe Rashab doesn't seichen to his own Ayin Beis like he often does, I can't explain that. Usually such a thing he would refer earlier, but for whatever reason he doesn't. But I would speculate at this point, Mokem Acher means earlier in Ayin Beis, which I know is not common. Usually Mokem Acher would be elsewhere. So that's why I thought maybe that Tzemach Tzedek, upon which he bases some of these ideas. But I don't think so. Because the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't really talk about the tzeneris, the different ways. But there he talks about Pnimius Hakav, Atzmis Hakav. So you can check it out. I don't know yet. I didn't read it well enough to tell you why he changes when he says Shema B'chinas Pnimius Hakav, and before he said Atzmis Hakav. I still have to learn it inside, but I did discover this, which was interesting. So I wanted to just share it with you guys. Okay.
I think that it's not what Rebbe Rashab referring, but I think in Tzadik Dalet we learn about this topic of the tzeneris and tzeneris.
But Tzadik Dalet is the Frierdiker Rebbe, it's the next generation. There's no way that Rebbe Rashab is referring to Tzadik Dalet.
I know.
So Mokem Acher has to be something before by the Rebbe Rashab. And Tzadik Dalet is based on Ayin Beis, not the other way around. Tzadik Dalet discusses it as well, but yeah.
Yeah. What is Shema HaChodosh? What is
that? I told you is Barichas Gdela in volume 1 in Ayin Beis. A whole piece on Shema HaChodosh. You want to know the page? Are you interested in looking, or are you not going to look anywhere? If you're interested where, I can tell you where it is. It starts Be'erech Shema Chodesh. So whole Arichas Gdela Mamish. Yeah. Perek Reish Samach Gimel, 263, page 533. Is where he talks about Shema Chodesh. Okay, let's finish now this paragraph. I'm going to continue here in the bottom of page 1185. So where did we stop? So then he said, okay, so what do we establish? That Adam, the Adam of Malchus, withdraws from the Adam of Zah, withdraws from the Adam of Chachma, which all the way back to Ak. Adam is the Pnimius that connects Hiskawalus, connects Mekasher or Mechaber or Mamshel Gili Eir and stuff all the way into Biyah. But then he qualifies V'ima yes, and I'm just going to read this line again. I'm starting from the line. It says, V'ima yes she'ena dema bitl d'shem ma debiyah. Read this yesterday, but I'll go over it again now. Even though you cannot compare, it's not similar. The bitl of shema biyah, b'riya tzilus, shema da tzilus, to shema and atzilus. Well, kamoshi is boer be'ezus Hashem is baruch, as shall be explained with God's help. U'makom mokim al yidei zehu hamshachas er v'agili, makom mokim al yidei zehu hamshachas er v'agili b'chinas gili er atzmi. Nevertheless, it's still a gili, a transmission and a revelation of a gili er atzmi. Though there's a distinction which he's going to explain. But now, in the parentheses, he's going to give us a little taste of what he says then. Because how could you say at the same time that there's a difference, you're also saying there's something that is connecting. Remember, kegavna, al mitador, kegavna da al milah, like Rabbi Yitzchak said. So there is a connection. And the whole question Rabbi Yehuda had, as he explained in the previous page, is how do you connect biyah, tatzilus, when they're so different? So he says the Adam does it. The Adam draws a new level of energy all the way into biyah. And not only that, it's also the er atzmi into the kelim of biyah, if you recall. But he didn't spell it all out yet. So he's going to say now in this parentheses, how could something be a lower level yet still have similarity to a higher level? So he says, V'yesh leimer. We can say, remember we said in every world there's Adam, every world there's a Shema. And yet it's different worlds. Adam Kadman is not Atzilus. Chachma is not Zah, Zah is not Malchus. And Biyah is not Atzilus. So when you say Adam de Bria, Adam de Yetzira, Adam de Asiya, on one hand you say that you're calling them all Adam, on the other hand, there are different levels. So he's going to give an example now from Keser. Says you could say the differences of the Shema, the bittul in each world, hu al derech kamoy ba'er makiv yesh makifim pratim. So in volume 1, we learned this at length. That on one hand, er makif we know is an equalizer. What is a makif? On a very basic level, a circle doesn't have a top and a bottom. A line has a top and a bottom. So if you're inside a circle, it equalizes. Everything inside the circle is equal distant from the outer circle, because the circle doesn't have, it's a makif. So the question he asked in volume 1, so how could you say they're makifim pratim? If makif is an equalizer, how do you say there's makif of Atzilus, a makif of Atik, a makif of Ak, makif of Bria, makif of Chachma, makif of Bina? It's one equalizer. So he explained that on one hand, they're all equal as their makif, but in makif itself, you could have differences. That's what was explained at length in volume 1. So he says, Yesh makif, and yet they all have something in common. They're one in their core personality because they're all makif, which means they're all transcendent. They're all above and equalize the level of which they are a makif. So the difference is what level they're addressing. But on the other hand, all the makifim have something be'etzem echad, as we explained earlier at length, he's referring literally to Ayin Beis volume 1. I could tell you the page where he begins the whole discussion. How could you say that there's makifim levels? And that's when he went into the whole explanation that their spheres have levels. Remember, sphere from the word number, narrative, misper, sipur, and avin sapir. So why did he go into that topic? So let me just refer you to the page, because he came to answer, how could you say makifim, levels in makifim? Literally, chapter 80, page 150, Omnam adayin tzarich lahavin. How could you say there's levels in eagle? When an eagle is a circle, how could you say there's levels? I understand physically you could have a big circle, you could have a small circle. But at the end of the day, in Ruchnius, they're all circle, they're equalizers. From the point of view of Makiv, there's no difference between Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, and the other spheres, or between Atzilus and... So the answer is that on one hand, the level you're talking about, there's a difference. But the Makif, they all come from one central thing. It's above the structure. It's beyond the structure. That's why there's a Lashon in Kabbalah, and the Alter Rebbe explains it in the Kutei Teirah, Vayikirach, that Kol HaKsarim Nishtalshlim Zemezeh. You may have heard this expression. All the Ksarim, every Keser has a direct link to the other, even though the Keser of Bria follows 10 spheres. There's Chachma, Bina, Das, and so on of Atzilus. And yet the Keser of each level connects to each other. There's actually a Gemara that Chassidus brings, that Rebbe brings it. It says, Afila reish kargisa mishemayeh yahavale. Even the head, there's gargisa, there's different ways to explain, but one of the explanations that even the guy that's appointed to be the head water carrier, in the olden days, you had people who were water carriers, and it was the head of the team, reish gargisa. Now you could say reish gargisa, I mean a simple water carrier. It says that also comes from Shemayim and has a connection to the Melech, to the king of the entire country. Because a leader is a leader. So even though he's a leader of only water carriers, but the leadership component in him equalizes him with all other leaders. So that's an example that all the Ksarim, even though Keser of Asiya is not Keser of Atzilus, but being that it's a Keser, a crown, they all have the element of, in the language of Chassidus, they're all Ratzon Elyon. So when the Eibishter wants something, Ratzon, we're not talking about Giluim Eres Pnimim. We're not talking about imminent levels where you have a difference between Chachma and Bina. We're talking Ratzon Elyon. Is there a difference by God's will, whether he says, Mitzvahs Esa Daraisa, or he wants you to go to chop wood? Afilu L'Stavinu Lachta Veitzim. Even if we're told to chop wood, from the Ratzon Elyon point of view, that's what God wants. What difference does it make if it's a big thing or it's a small thing? At the same time, it's still a difference because in actuality, chopping wood is not like keeping Shabbos. So on one hand, it's all Ratzon Elyon. That's what he means, Muhus Echad. That's what he's saying here. So even though the Makifim are different levels, there are specific Makifim, Ratzon, like the Ratzon to walk is not the same like the Ratzon to connect to the Rebbe. And yet, from the Ratzon point of view, there's something in common because they're both Ratzon HaNefesh. So that's what he says, that even though there's Makim Komak Makolu Echad Be'etzem Muhusam, as explained at length earlier. Kamoy Ken Yesh Leimer, the Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush. Same thing you can say B'Shema, with Shema, the Ima Yesh, even though she Yesh Shema, that Silas Shema Debriya, even though there's a Shema in Atzilus. So of course the bittul in Atzilus, the Adam Ma and bittul in Atzilus is a far higher bittul than the bittul in Biyah, in Bria. Nevertheless, Makom Mokim Be'etzem Muhusam Echad. Who? In their core personality, they're both bittul. They're both Ma. V'akol ubchinas er atzmi. And all of it is the er atzmi that's causing the bittul, which is causing something more than existence has on its own. In other words, Atzilus on its own without Shema is Chitzenius Atzilus. It's a structure. Yes, it's divine. The Chitzenius of Bria without Ma Adam Primis is the structure of Bria, and they're very different. But the Shema, the Adam in Atzilus introduces a higher level of a bittul, which brings down the Er Atzmi, which is not a reflective Er, not the Ha'ara, the reflection. It's fulfilling the purpose of Atzilus. In that sense, the Adam in Bria is fulfilling the purpose of Bria. So yes, it's different levels, but they both have fundamentally the same function. It's just affecting different levels differently. That's what it comes down to. So they're both Be'etzem Mahusam one, and yet, and they're both Er Atzmi. But he still said he's going to explain it more later, so we hope there'll be more explanation. But that's what he says right now in the parentheses. So what do we have from this? That the Adam is able to bring down the Er Atzmi to the lowest levels, even if they're a lower level.
Rabbi, is this question or no?
if you don't mind, let me just finish till the end of the paragraph, then I'll take questions. Because there's a flow here. I want to make sure the flow goes right now. Now he's going back to the language that he began in the middle of last page. The words of Rabbi Yehuda. Remember Rabbi Yehuda said, Ubora Adam al Kula. When he responded to Rabbi Yitzchak, what did he say? He said like this. Rabbi Yehuda Bolavai, he said that Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Yitzchak, Hochu vadai. What you said is certainly true, that the lower world corresponds to the higher. And ihu yakri le'elo latata. That's the flaw, the wonder, the glory is higher and lower. But it's still not understandable how. And he asked all the questions. So now he's going back to the words of Rabbi Yehuda. V'zeu sha'omar ubara adam al kula. And this is what Rabbi Yehuda said, that he created the man, Adam, above them all, above all the worlds, above Elo and Latata. What does that mean? It means B'chines Shema, Shubchines Aprimius. He created Adam, the name Shema, which is Primius, as we've been describing, the Primius of it all. Va'idezehu Agili. And through that comes the Gili from the higher to the lower, from the higher to the lower, that it should all be equal. The Shema, Shubchines Primius, Hari'en Bezechiluki Madrekes. Shema, which is Primius, there's no distinction of levels. All the levels we spoke about is on Chitzenius, like he explained. On Primius, the Primius sees the Kavona. Like if someone to ask you, from the point of view of a human body, if you have, God forbid, an infection in the toe, in a small toe of your leg, of a person's leg, you could say it's nothing compared to the brain. But from the point of view of life, the life is equal, the life force is equal in the whole body equally. You can't say one body is a little less important. You don't say, for example, one cell, what's one cell compared to 75 trillion cells? Doesn't work that way, because it's one whole. From the point of view of Primus, Chitzenius, yes. On the Chitzenius level, there are organs that are more primary than other organs, but not from the point of view of Pnimius and Atzmi. There, that's all part of one picture, and if one thing is missing, all is missing. By Matan Torah, it says if one Jew wasn't there from 600,000, Matan Torah wouldn't have happened. Say, what's one person? But it doesn't work that way, because because you're talking about the Primus, like just like you ask a mother, you have 10 children, so what's wrong with you? You're missing one child. Doesn't work that way, because it's not about numbers. The love is equal. And you're not saying, okay, 9 is more than 10. In numbers, yes, that's true, but not in a Primius Dika level. So there's no Chiluk in Madregas. The Eisei Skalus, and this Shema, which is Bitl, as we learned, causes the interconnectivity of all levels. Vahischabrus b'kol mokim. The interconnectivity and the connection or the attachment in all levels, as we discussed. Uliyah shehu b'chinas habitl, and being that this Shema is a state of bitl, alidezehu agili gamda er pnimi bibiyah. Through this comes the gili not only of the makif, because the makif you could still argue is an equalizer, but also of er pnimi bibiyah, like he explained, also yakre, yikore, gam kein ad lamata mata. Gamba er primi, I'm sorry, gili gamda er primi bibiyah, azehu agili gamba er primi bibiyah, and gam kein ad lamata mata. Also all the way below to the lowest levels. And that's what Rabbi Yehuda is coming to add, that the Adam, his Aveda, and we're going to explain, this is not over yet. The next page, he's going to start explaining what the Adam does, how our Aveda achieves this unity. And remember, it's all the unity between B'Shamayim and Mal, Oretz Mitachas, that he began to discuss on page 1182, the connection from the highest to the lower levels. The Pasuk is saying clearly, and Oretz Mitachas. And the Zohar that we're discussing now is coming to explain that in the fullest sense. So in general, he principally answered the question. There's more to be discussed, but this is what Adam achieves, And that's the answer that Rabbi Yitzchak didn't say Adam. He just made the statement. And Rabbi Yehuda comes and explains it deeper. He says, in a deeper way, he says, that the Pnimi also radiates Begili in Biyah. Not, even though Biyah is lower than Atzilus, but here, once you reveal the Pnimius, then that equalizes them and creates that Hamshach. Okay. Now I'll be happy to take any questions.
So I have a question, if I understood it correctly. Maybe I just didn't understand it, so forgive it if the question's misfounded. I think you said that the Shema or Adam, for lack of a better word, Mamalet brings, or Mamshich brings down the or in so forth, gives or Pnimi to each of the spheres. That the or Pnimi is inserted, if you will, by the avoida of Adam. I think you said that. My question is, I had understood that there is an or pnimi already essentially imbued in the spheros, and maybe Adam miyached, he unifies them all up from across the different spheros. But my question is Adam the sole agent of bringing the or pnimi into the sphera, or in other words, is he the sole agent of bringing or pnimi to the spheres, or is he hamshacha? Is he bringing it down from the or pnimi that's already in the sphere into this world? I'm a little confused about the back and forth there. Maybe it's just a really bad.
Let's not talk about spheres. Let's not talk about spheres. Let's talk about. No question is a bad question, by the way. So nothing wrong with asking. Let's talk about creation. You don't need to go into the spheres. Let's talk. I before we started all this, if you remember, I elaborated simply for this reason, to bring it down in very practical terms. God created the world, not the human being, not Adam. God created the world. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. He created heaven and earth, and created in 6 days. The human being doesn't come on the scene till the 6th day, right? So we know from this that existence is created by God. But there's something a human being will introduce and contribute that kavyachol, so to speak, God himself is not going to do. Ashabora Elokim lases l'sakin is a famous expression. Rashi brings it and Chassidus cites it often. God created a world on a basic level. He put all the components and ingredients. But now he wants his partner, called Adam, to come and develop these resources, reveal its potential, transform a material world and make it a dira b'tachtenim permanently. So basically, the world is not a complete world until the human being does his thing. The pasuk even says that the earth, Ayin, what's the pasuk there? Eretz Ayin, Lavid Desa Adoma. The earth on its own, if you don't have a human being who's going to farm and harvest crops, you're not going to have bread. We're not going to have anything. So you have basically, God provides all the resources. He creates the world in 10 statements and Asar Mamaris. He gave the Torah to the human being and says, follow this Torah and through it you'll transform the world. Now, this transformation is not just revealing the hidden energy. That's the first step. We spoke about revealing the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, that the Yesh should come to recognize, because the world, remember, is a material world that doesn't recognize the divine. So the first thing the human being is recognize godliness. The next thing is climb the ladder and reveal deeper levels till you really reveal the Atzmi. Because in creation itself, you only have the outer energy that God used to create. The inner energy of the kavanah, the purpose of making it a home for the divine, that is the role of the Adam. That's Shema, the bittul. Without that, you have a world that's not transgressing, but it's also not growing. The world without the human being would not destroy anything, but it also wouldn't build anything. And it's the human being that comes and introduces the inner pnimius, a kavanah, of all of existence, and therefore whatever Atzilus is, or Bria is, or Yitzir, Asiya, the Adam transforms them and makes them into that the lower worlds, and everything becomes connected, because that's what a human being does. We connect everything. On its own, the world is just there, just like a stage. And we come and make that deeper connection by using the world to fulfill God's will, by doing mitzvahs, by being loving and kind and generous and so on. So there we make all the connections. And more than that, we connect the different worlds. Biyah connects with Atzilus, that they become similar. And you also, like you said on page 1184, the reveal Atzmi, which was not there on its own in creation. It only comes through the Veda of a person that brings a core new energy that wasn't there on its own. And we bring it all the way down to the Kalim of Biyah, like he said, not just the Eir and the Sham of Biyah, but all the way to Kalim and all the way to this world. So when Mashiach comes and all this will be revealed, it won't just be a big thing. We just opened up the box and we revealed the energy within. We'll have transformed a material world and brought the highest levels of godliness, and in a way that permeates and transforms the material world. So this is, of course, the basis of everything in Torah and Mitzvahs, the whole basis. So your question is a fine question, but it's basically the essence of the whole purpose of why we're here. It's like asking, what does a human being add? And that's the answer briefly. In Samach Vav, and I quoted it as well earlier, he says, and here it too in Ayin Beis in volume 1, that we do two things. One is we draw the energy into a place that before was not there, into a Kalim, into the Yesh, that the Yesh should experience Elikus. But then we also draw a new level of Elikus that was not even there in the higher levels. So at the end of the day, we also draw new levels of energy that weren't even there before the Tzimtzum.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Awesome.
Okay. Any other questions before we continue to the next page, 1186?
Just one thing, I think I missed it. You're saying Hagrama Nuyin Almaya or something?
Yeah.
You said in the beginning. What is the translation of Hagrama?
Grama? Grama
The
are the bones.
Grama.
The bones.
All right, thanks.
Skeleton, the bones. Bone, atzomis.
All right, thank you. I thought I just.
Okay.
Could I ask something?
Sure.
You said before that through the part of the Adam, we are reaching in a place that even before the Tzimtzum did not reach before the Adam. What does that mean? Before the Tzimtzum is talking about Atzmos. What do you reach something new that was not before?
No, before the Tzimtzum is Eir. Eir Ein Sof, Mamala Kol HaMetzias, so in Ayin Beis, and in Samach Vav, look at the first Maimer. And Ayin Beis in volume 1 explained there's the Eir that was there that you're Megala, that's the Ovis, and Matan Teira was Megala Eir Chodesh. What does it mean in Tanya? Siman Yudalid in Ageres HaKedesh, every Rosh Hashanah comes a Eir Chodesh and Mechudesh Shale'elim Lo Yehoya. What does that mean? It means because Eir Ein Sof has infinite possibility. There's always more that can be revealed. And the Eir is please their length. The Eir Chodesh that comes through Aveda Sa'adam, Aveda B'Keich Atzmei, that we draw, not only we Mevgala Eir, we also draw a new level of Eir that wasn't there before.
Even Koydam
The Chiddush, of course, that Yamamala, the type in the Sava Kodesh Baruch Hu, Lisley did it b'tachtenim. Okay. Good. We go to the next page, unless anybody has any other question. Okay. on top of page 1186. We turn the
Th-
page.
This idea of Shema, which is Machaber everything, it sounds like that it's in totality, it's the idea of Yehudi Ra, the Das Elyon.
Who
That
said
makes a
that?
connection. I'm asking that question because here we're saying the Mischabrus of joining everything together, it's at a higher or. It sounds like it's the voda of Das Tachton is mitzad the Ayin, the Yesh Nivra. It seems like this whole new idea we're bringing here sounds like the Ayin of the Yesh meeting, one of the levels, and that's how we get this whole Hischabrus from top to bottom and the new or, etc.
First of all, there's no hint to that at all. Not necessarily the case, because the ayin of the yesh amiti is also bittul. It's called ayin. It's the bittul hayesh to the ayin. So I would assume that since it's coming through an adam, it's also bittul of shema. You could say shema has many levels of bittul, including the bittul of bittul hayesh and bittul mitzias, and the bittul of das tachton and bittul of das elyon. Remember, v'yadaita hayem v'shavesel levavecha, v'yadaita is referring to all levels of das, not just das elyon, also das tachton, vice versa. Havayu elikim, both ways. Havai in elikim and elikim in havaya. And all that is coming to create the unity between Shemayim and Mal, v'aretz metachas. So my take on it would be that Shema is just another word for ayin and bittul, and it's on all levels. There's in the level of ayin of yesh nivra and ayin of yesh amiti. Now, I'm assuming that the Rebbe Rashab is going to come back to it, so we'll see what he says, maybe more specifics. But at this point, I would just say that Shema works perfectly here because it's the Adam that's introducing this idea. Whatever level the idea is, but it's creating bittul in existence, and that bittul is the purpose and the premise of Shema. Is the ultimate bittul the highest levels of Das Elyon? Of course. But he's not talking about the ultimate. He's talking about all levels of bittul.
It's Adam. We are the likeness of that Adam, the very level. And
But we do all levels. Adam also does bittul yesh, and also the
Yes,
ayin of the yesh nivra.
of course.
So why would we negate that here?
Mhm. No, I wasn't negating it. I was wondering if
Like I just said, it's like saying the word bittul is on all levels, starting from the lowest all the way to the highest. So he's not
Right.
spelling it out, but I would not say he's talking
Okay.
about Das Elyon there. No.
Okay, it's another
About all
way.
levels of Adam and bittul.
We can say it's a
He even
Chabrus.
says the Shema and Biyah, the
Mhm.
Shema and Atzilus, the Shema on higher levels. He says it clearly that Ma is everywhere.
Right. So we could say that that's the Hischabrus of the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra with the Yesh, and that would be the Hischabrus.
This is already now getting too mathematical for me. It comes down to
Why?
where you stand.
We talked about this. We talked about
It all
this.
comes
This is
to me.
Tachton.
Shema and Ayin is the same thing, and it's on
Mhm.
all levels. It's all relative to where you are. If you're
Mhm.
holding by the bittul of the first levels of bittul of Ayesh of the Yesh Hanivra to the Ayin Hanivra of the Yesh Hanivra, then we're
Mhm.
talking about Shema on that level. If you're going higher, it's higher. It's all relative to the Aveda of the person.
Mhm.
But they're
Does it
all
have
talking
to-
about bittul here. It's not talking about the highest level.
I'll
And
ask
as I
you
just
another.
explained, V'yadaita hayayim is all levels
Okay.
of das, and the bittul therefore is on all levels, no matter what level you're talking. So it comes down to where you stand.
So I'll ask another mathematical question then. Also, the Shema is always is that the expression of the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. So even by Das Tachton it's the insertion, the Shem Havaya into Shem Adni. You're still talking about the expression of Shema has to do with the Shem Havaya that's found in that level, where the Adni's in
Correct?
the predominance.
Correct. Havayu Elakim, correct. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Okay.
Shema on every level, yeah.
All right. Good. Thank you.
Okay. Top of 1186. However, Amnam kol zeh toli ba'adam atachtim. All this that we spoke on all the levels of Adam, creating the unity on whatever level you're discussing, from the higher to the lower, all this is dependent on the Adam atachtim, not the Adam Elyon. The Adam atachtim, we, the human being below, who draws down the energy and the revelation through his work in the doing mitzvahs. Maisa mitzvahs. He says Dafka Maisa. Remember mitzvahs Maisius, all the way down below in this world, where some would have the opinion that you can't reach the divine quite the same way in actionable mitzvahs than in the ruchnius. He says no, through Avedasa Maisa mitzvahs. And now he's going to explain that. In other words, how is this all effectuated? We explained that Adam in each level, Adam, Bara Adam al Kula, in each level you have the level of Adam, Primius, Shema, Hiskalulus, Bittul, and all that. But now he's actually explaining how this actually happens. How the human being, the Adam HaTachton, through Ma'aseh Mitzvahs, accomplishes all these levels of Hiskalulus and Achdus and so on. By Inyanhu. And the Inyan is, Tehine, now in mitzvahs, yes, Beis Inyanim. When you do a mitzvah, there's two things in each mitzvah. In mitzvahs. Ha'echad, ha'alef, hu de klolos kol ha'mitzvah surak hamshachas ratzon elyon. That the general mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs, all it is drawing down the God's desire and will. Ratzon elyon. Afshu neged ha'seichel, sheyi ashras alakuz be'elam, even though from a point of view of seichel, like we said before, when you go only with seichel adam, not tamuna, but when he spoke in page 1182, by the nations of the world, when you go with seichel, you could say that it's against seichel to say there should be the hashras hashchina, ashras alakuz be'elam, that Elikuz, godliness, should dwell and manifest in the world. But kol mokim, nevertheless, they have mitzvahs, through mitzvahs. In other words, if you went only with seichel and God didn't give us mitzvahs, you would say, how could a material world draw down the divine in this world the same as it is in spiritual worlds? But something changed here. The Eibishter gave us mitzvahs. Aidea mitzvah sha'ama v'nasa. Ritzene, Shamati v'nasa Ritzene, that means that we are now fulfilling, v'nasa Ritzene, we're fulfilling God's desire. Hey mamshichim elikuz be'elam. The people, the human beings that do this, draw elikus in the world. So that's the first statement he made here. In other words, take away mitzvahs from the picture and go only with seichel. You could live a godly life. But you can't say that you could draw down the Likus Be'elam like it is in Atzilus or in the higher worlds. But something happened. The Eibishter gave us mitzvahs. The mitzvahs is Ratzon Elyon. And through that, we have an extra advantage now. We have the tool of the mitzvahs to draw the Ratzon Elyon and Likus into this world. That's what he says. It's an interesting way of phrasing it. But he's referring back, if you remember, back on page 1182, where he spoke about this. That if you go, like he said, these are the words he said. Lama yemero hagoyim ayen no elekechem, hayno elekushim amshichim ayidei mitzvahs maitzes. Dal aveda ruchnius, on spiritual work, kamay aveda sa'avos v'kahai gavna, moidim hem shayidei zem amshichim elekus. When you're talking about the work of the patriarchs, it was all spiritual. So they acknowledge that you draw down godliness. And then he goes, but how do you do it through physical actions? Physicality is inferior to spirituality. And it goes on to say, because they go with seichel. And you go with seichel, and then the day ruchni is equal. But the fact is the Eibishter gave us mitzvahs. And because of mitzvahs, The mitzvahs create the drawing down of Ratzon Elyon, the highest levels of God's will, into this world. Yeah, this is all back before he started the Zohar. Good. Dihine, because now, Taryag mitzvahs, the Raisa, the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, the Zayin mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, and the 7 rabbinic mitzvahs, together they add up to 620. They are 620 levels of Keser. Keser is adds up to 620. Keser is Tofresh Chaf. And it's called the 620 pillars of light. It's a level. So the 613 mitzvahs and the 7 mitzvahs that Rabbanan add up to Keser, which is Ratzon. So b'meila, the mitzvahs, all of them in their entirety, are drawing down the Ratzon of Keser in this world. In other words, if God did not give mitzvahs to the world, you wouldn't have Keser. You'd have Chochmah, Bina, Das, you'd have distinctions. But you wouldn't have the Keser. And now he explains, why is it called pillars of light? What is the role of a pillar? When you have beams or pillars in a house, what is its role in a structure? It attaches the ground, ritzbas akarka, the floor of the ground, imaliyah, with the higher floors, oy hagag, or the roof. So that's what a pillar does. So this is going to explain why it's called 620 pillars, because a pillar. So if you have a house, you have let's say a 5-story house, and a roof, is the pillar that connects and allows it to stand. Without the pillars, you don't have a connection between the lower and the higher. It says kamoy kain aideha mitzvahs. Same thing through the mitzvahs, the connections that God gave us. The 620 mechabrim rotzen echad haposhet sheyishre v'yashgiach be'elamis. It sounds to me that this Lashonos here are either the Alter Rebbe or the Mittler Rebbe, because you see, they're not common language. What do the mitzvahs do? They connect the Ratzon Echad, HaPoshet, the one seamless or shapeless desire of God, Sheyishra, that should reside, that should hover, Yishra should dwell, V'yashgiach, and should govern, Be'elamis, should be present in the worlds. Interesting word, yashgiach. Yeah, yashgiach, because b'pashtus, when you do the mitzvahs, you're allowing God's ratzon to rule your life and to rule the world. That's b'pashtus why it says yashgiach, because ashgacha pratis is even without mitzvahs. Yeah, so it's yishra v'yashgiach be'elamis. Hainu, which means simply put, sheyiyah gilei haratzon be'elam. There should be the revelation of the desire of God in this world. So the world on its own is also created by God's will. He created it. But you don't see begoli, God's desire, controlling the world. When you take let's say, a tzemer, wool, and you make it into a mitzvah of tzitzis, or you take cloth, parchment, you make it into tefillin or mezuzah or teira, or you keep Shabbos, or you eat kosher, what you're doing is aligning the world with God's ratzon in a revealed way. Whereas the world on its own exists, good, but it's not necessarily following and aligned with God's ratzon. When you bring a mitzvah, you're bringing God's ratzon into the world, and essentially God's ratzon and purpose, why he created wool and parchment and everything else in the first place. So that's one thing that mitzvahs do. That's ha'aleph. Remember, he said there's 2 things in mitzvahs. So this is drawing down the Ratzon Elyon into this world, which is neged haseichel. He says, so neged haseichel, it's against the seichel that Lakush should be so revealed in this world, but the mitzvahs allow us to do that. Ayin Beis, what's the second dimension or element in mitzvahs? Hu protis ha-mitzvah, not the overall 620 mitzvahs, that's the Ratzon Echad. They're all one desire of God. They're all part of one large, shapeless desire. But now we're talking about the specific mitzvahs. The Kol Achas Yamshacha B'Chinus U'Madreget Pratis B'Fnei Atzma. Every mitzvah is its own transmission of a level and a specific dimension on its own. Hamiyuched l'mitzvah hi. That's unique to that particular mitzvah. L'moshel, for example, mitzvah tzitzis, the mitzvah of tzitzis. Hi hamshachas hameichin. When mitzvah of tzitzis draws down meichin, the meichin means a divine intelligence. Vihi mitzemer, and tzitzis is dafka from tzemer, from wool. You can't use any material. Shazein v'sareshe ka'omenaki, like we learned earlier. What does the tzemer represent? Tzemer represents the hair on the head of the Atik Yemen. It's a spiritual level that is white, that's pure or white like wool. Omer is tzemer. The ayin is replaces the tzaddik in Aramaic. So Omer Noki, like pure wool. Liyaz b'chinas chochmei elah. That the sareshe, which is on top of the hair. So the pasuk in Daniel says, "Va'atik yemin Yosef al Kusaya," the level called Atik yemin of aged years, which is the level of Atik Tainuk Primius Keser. That is sitting on a throne. It says, "V'sareshe ka'omer naki." It says, "Levusher k'tlag chiver." His garments are white like snow. V'sareshe, and the hair on his head is like pure like wool. So it's a spiritual level. From that pure like wool, which is from Keser, goes to Chochmah, the Reish. Remember, at the end, it's some Reish on the Reish, on the Meichin. How does that evolve in this physical world? That's wool. The wool, physical wool on this earth, manifests this level of Sar Reishe, like he says, that it should be Nimshach in Chochmei law. So when you put on tzitzis and it's made of wool, you're drawing down the level of this white hair. I'm sorry, Sardesha, the hair on the head that is pure like wool. That's what you're doing. Essentially, Amshachas Hameichin in Chassidus language.
Sa'areshe is the Atik. The Cyrus of the Atik were Nimshach in Chochmah Elah.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that this dafka, this particular example, which is a hamshach of moichin into this world, and the mitzvah of tzitzis, which represents the mitzvahs themselves, among other things, comes to control or dominate the behema-ness, which, in other words, that the sechel, our own sechel, should help us control our own whatever impulses, animalistic impulses. Can one make the correlation?
Yeah, but that's not the point here. He's just giving an example. You have to learn the Maimarim and Chassidus on mitzvah tzitzis that talk about this more at length.
Yeah. No, I know it's not the main point. I was just asking as a, I don't know, digression. Sorry.
It's fine. I'm just saying there's Maimarim that talk about this, about the mitzvah of tzitzis and tzemer, what it means in real avodah.
Is it related to this, what I asked, or no?
Yeah, if you look at those Maimarim, they talk about this.
Okay.
It's not the only way it manifests about sublimating the animal soul. There's other ways to explain it too.
Okay, thank you.
Because you could also bring moichin to help your nefesh halikis, to learn Torah and understand God.
Well, sure. I wasn't saying it's exclusive, but it also does this overcoming the animal.
So that's why I say you have to look in the Maimarim on tzitzis. We'll discuss this more at length.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just wondering whether I should stop right here. I'll just read the parentheses and then I'll stop because he goes on with the tzitzis for a while. I'll read a few more lines. So he's explaining what this means. Of course, there's moichin before the mitzvah of tzitzis. We're created with moichin. Like I said before, the 10 spheres and the world was created before the human being came and did a mitzvah. So he's explaining what happens, what's the process. So he says, in other words, there's moichin there in the beginning. We're created with a mind. What does the mitzvah do? He says, the Aveda of Amshachas Meichin is to draw additional energy into the mind from Atzmus Ein Sof. That's what the mitzvah accomplishes. Ukidu being HaKadosh Baruch Hu maniach tefillin, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mesatev b'tzitzis. Like as it's known when it talks about the Eibishter putting on tefillin, and the Eibishter wrapping himself with tzitzis. U'kamosh is bar le'il. The le'il is interesting where he means. Does he mean page 1183? No, it's two kitzur there. I don't think he means it there. The bottom line is that when we do the mitzvah, we actually draw down and create something new that wasn't there before. I think he's trying to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu maniach tefillin is when we put on tefillin, the Eibishter puts on tefillin. Maybe. In other words, that's more than just the hamshacha of moichin on its own, that we're drawing down a level that is tasteless, an abundant, something more than the regular flow. So basically, in the 6 days of the week, God created creation. He invested a certain amount of energy into creation, including into the moichin, into intellect. The mitzvah increases that energy back from the source much higher than it is on its own. That's what a mitzvah essentially does. That's what he said.
Thank you.
And from this chokhmah, Sareshe, I just want to say, he doesn't say atik here. I said it because that's the posuk. Here it sounds like Sareshe Komenaki is the hair on the head, is moichin. So it may not be necessarily atik into moichin. Just saying that as, or may yeah be. I'm not positive. I just want to make that clear. He just says the hair on the head is like,
Cyrus are the atik because it's a chayis mitzvah.
That's what you're saying, but the Rebbe Rashab does not use the word atik here. That's all I'm pointing out. I'd like to be b'diuk. He could mean atik into chachma, or he could be speaking about dafka, the hair on the head, meaning the level of meichin being nimshach from that. Yes, in the big picture, the sidus are drawn from atik and arich into chachma. But I just wanted to point out, if someone asked me, does it say that here? It doesn't say it explicitly. Okay. Chachma, that's coming from.
But he said lihiyois bechinas chachma elo. Are
you disagreeing with what I just wanted to make a point? I like to be b'diuk. And also, I don't know all the Kabbalistic levels of tzitzis. So b'diuk, the Rebbe Rashab could have said, Hamshachas atik and chachma. He didn't say it, so I don't want to say it either. I brought it as context from the pasuk and what may say in other places. But being that I'm teaching this, I'm trying to teach it b'diuk. He doesn't say, these bechinas chachma law could be the Hamshacha from the Sareshe, Komenak into chachma. In Inyan, could it be coming from atik? Yeah, but I don't know why we have, I'm just explaining diuk here, you know? And this chachma that we're drawn down through tzitzis, that draws down bittul into the neshamas Yisrael. So we're talking about the specific element of a mitzvah now, not the general, the inyan habeis in the mitzvahs. The zeu inyan semer hatzitzis, and that is the inyan of the wool of the tzitzis, drawing down the chachma, the inyan of bittul from chachma. And I'll just read one more line. V'achut shel tcheles. We know tzitzis originally had to also have one tzitzah, one strand, one string thread of tchelis, which was a particular type of color from the chilozin that we don't have today. So he says, what is the chutz tchelis in the tzemer itself? Hu mebchinas meichin de abba shenimshir b'malchus. That's meichin de abba that drawn malchus. Tchelis is malchus. Drawn to malchus. Who liyas kaloyin ubitla yesh. And that's to take the bitla of chachma to turn it into malchus, kiloyin ubitla yesh. Tchelis comes from the word kiloyin also. It has the word tcheles like kiloyin. That kiloyin is like the dissipation, or kiloyin the dissolving, and the bitla of yesh of malchus is also affected by this tzemer. That's the tchelis.
Is it tchelis malchus? Why? Why is tchelis malchus? Maybe tchelis is kiloyin and chochma in nimshach in malchus.
I said the word tchelis, Chassidus brings in other places, also comes from the word kiloyin. That's what I said. So he's saying that the chochma from meichin da abba is being nimshach into the bitla hayesh, and the dissolving and the and the bitla yesh of malchus, which is tchelis. That's all he said. So it's not just bitl of chachma; it's also bitl all the way into malchus. So he explained what tzitzis is: the tzemer, in general, the white wool, and the blue thread. Okay. The whole discussion in my morim that Keirach said, what about a talish of kulit chelis? Is it chayiv b'tzitzis? So Chassidus talks about this at length. What exactly is chelis? What is the tzitzis, and so on. But we're going to stop here. He's in the middle of discussing the details of mitzvahs now. Remember, the first point was drawing down the divine desire into this world. Now he's talking about the specific hamshacha, transmission that each mitzvah accomplishes. Okay. He's going to talk, I see, tefillin, and then atilis yadayim. This goes for a while, and then he's going to come back to explain how Adam, through mitzvahs, creates the hiskalus, the bitl of Shema that connects the worlds and unites them. That's what he's going to be saying now. So we'll stop here, a little way down on top of page 1186.